Is the federal government really going to legalize weed? Well, they're talking right now about taking it from a controlled substance category 1 to category 3. Controlled substance category 1 is things that have no medicinal use, like heroin and ketamine, some other things that are drugs of abuse that don't have any place in therapy. And marijuana is in that category. But also, they're talking about legalizing it in many states now, already have, but in more states, and maybe a federal thing to legalize it. So here's the thing. At Rx Healthy Habits, we want to dive in this topic because I want to talk about this topic from the standpoint of the health pros and cons. And I have to tell you, just full disclosure, as a pharmacist, my wife and I, since we've been 18 years of age, marijuana use is off the table. So we have we're not users of marijuana, THC or anything, any edible or anything, CBD. As pharmacists, it's very important to when we started pharmacy school and all through it, that is very much frowned upon. So we have people we know that are marijuana users, but also people that are really pushing for this that we know of. But I just want to talk about, I'm not going to talk about the whole thing because there's a lot of other factors besides the health benefit, the health pros and cons. And there are some health benefits from a medicinal marijuana standpoint. There's definitely a place in therapy for it. But as a pharmacist, I want to talk about some of the pros and cons from a health standpoint. And number one, I think, one of the pros, if you want to talk about a pro to marijuana legalization, is going to be the fact that if they do make it legal, it's going to have to fall under regulatory and quality control. And let me tell you something. The more I read about some of the controls in place right now, they're not up to par. There's too many things they're finding with these, and there's so many factors from growing to production to extraction to assaying to quality control to potency. None of that is really being done very well because many of them are self-monitored and there's not a lot of oversight. And I think that's one of the things that's really going to make a big difference. Now, of course, some people are saying as soon as you bring the government to it, they're going to tax it, they're going to do this. Yes, they will. But if it's going to be anything that's going to make it more, quality control, then it's going to make it much more better for people to do consume it, because they've been finding some contaminants, and they've been finding some mycotoxins, which are fungus. They've been finding a lot of things in some of these companies that say we have a great quality control product for recreational use also, that makes you wonder. So I think that really needs to take place, and that would be a health pro if they do some regulation and quality control from the federal level. Reduce criminalization. Now here's a pro, a health pro. If they do legalize it in the United States for recreational use, you're going to see less criminalization, of course, and you're not going to have people being arrested on, drug charges, especially marijuana possession, or, right now it's not so much there in many states, but it would be even less so. They also looked at, is there a reduction in some of those? Of course, that's a no-brainer. But is there a reduction in crime for violent crimes, which means some of the gang warfare and all that? In some of the states they've legalized it so far, they've not seen a drop in violent crimes. So you wonder, it would be good not to have the courts tied up with all the, the marijuana charges, but criminalization, it might have an effect on dropping that, but it doesn't have a big effect on the other crimes. So there's still a huge illicit market out there, and that's what's driving some of the criminalization. Here's a big one. Anybody in government loves this. The tax revenue for public health would be so fantastic because of the dollars going into some of the bigger issues like addiction programs for heroin. There could be a lot of monies used to help reduce drug abuse and prevention initiatives with the tax revenue that they get right now. If you look at the numbers, the state of California, I think last year had $1.7 billion in revenue. I think Colorado was close to the same or a little more. New York and some other states, I think they're going to end up over $2 billion. So they love this as a revenue source for them because it's really filling their coffers with some money that they wouldn't get from anywhere else. So that's going to be a plus, I guess, because it would help maybe in some other areas. People might debate that, but they're estimating by 2030, if recreational use was legalized, and I have some opinions on that, I'm just talking about the health pros and cons right now, it would probably be upwards of $80 billion in tax revenue. $80 billion. So you can see why some of the government wants in on this, right? Medical research. If you made marijuana, THC legal for recreational use as well as for medicinal, the research might really skyrocket even more on it, because there might be more demand there for people that are using recreational to say, hey, Number 5, a shift from the illicit market. Let me tell you right now, a bulk of the sales of marijuana, even in some of the states where it's illegal for recreational use, is still coming from illicit sources. So, and these guys are not good players at all. They really don't care. So some of these are contaminated with some heavy metals. There's just a lot of contamination with, like I said before, the mycotoxins. There might be contamination with a lot of other things in there, like pesticides. So there's a lot of issues with the illicit market that would be all erased if marijuana was legalized. So now, that's not to say there probably won't still be a black market, which is something we have to look at, but I think you'd see less, hopefully, of some of those bad players being involved. So hope that information helps on the pros, the health pros of of the legalization on a federal level of marijuana for recreational use. Now we're going to get into the cons. So now we're going to talk about some of the health cons of legalizing recreational use of marijuana. And here's the number 1 con, is the public health concerns have been expressed by a lot of folks that are experts, saying that it could lead to some negative health consequences, such as impaired cognitive function and some mental health issues and possibly addiction. Now, I'm going to rely on my notes. I hate to do that, but there's so much here. This is something that I got from the National Institutes of Health, and it's a phrase that I think is really kind of sums up what their concerns are that they have to really look into with THC, the active ingredient in marijuana. THC intoxication has been shown to impair cognitive function on a number of levels, from basic motor coordination to more complex tasks, such as the ability to plan, organize, solve problems, and make decisions, remember, and control emotions and behavior. So that's one of the things that they've said so far that's make them a little bit edgy about the whole thing. And it goes beyond that. It does look at some long-term residual effects, and there's a couple categories in there that could be an issue. Not too many, but there's a couple categories. I'm going to have you read about it. It's in my blog on RxHealthyHabits.com. We go into a lot of detail on this with every single link from some very credible sources, so you can read it. I'm not going to go through it all. This one is the second health con, if you want to call it, to legalize the marijuana, and that is a condition the CDC calls cannabis use disorder. So this is 3 out of 10 people who use marijuana on a regular basis do develop this cannabis use disorder. And another study estimated about 10% likelihood that you're going to become addicted to marijuana, because what will happen is, this is the signs of cannabis use disorder: using more marijuana than intended, trying but failing to quit the use of marijuana, spending a lot of time using marijuana, craving marijuana, using marijuana even if it causes problems at home, school, and work. And I've seen this in the work sites where people were getting high at work because they needed to cope with the stress, and they risked their jobs and got fired because it was found that they were getting high in the job. Not a good thing. Giving up important activities with friends and families in favor of getting high or using marijuana. Continuing to use marijuana despite physical or psychological problems. And experiencing marijuana withdrawal symptoms when they stop using the drug. Maybe a lot different than, say, opioid withdrawal, but they still had what they called withdrawal symptoms for not having it. So that I thought was pretty fascinating, and that is a big flag because it's 10%, or 3 out of 10 may develop that disorder. So kind of scary. Here's one. This is a big con. The impact on adolescents is absolutely one that I think people need to take a good hard look at. So let's talk about this. And again, I got to read my notes. The psychoactive substance, the non-activating substance of marijuana, is THC. The concentration in TNC marijuana product is proportional to its potency of how much of a high you get when consumed. Now, here's what they said. Marijuana use among adolescents, young adults can affect normal brain development, leading to problems in learning, memory, coordination, reaction time, and judgment. So they think that in the adolescent brain, there might be some issues if they start using marijuana at a young age, and especially if they're using, kind of like moderate to heavy amounts. It could have some long-term effects on the development of the adolescent brain. That one is a biggie. Impaired driving. There, obviously, in some states right now, there is some legal things if you're caught under the influence of marijuana, and they do have a way of telling what your levels are. but slow reaction time and ability to make decisions is sometimes compromised, obviously, when somebody has THC high amounts. And there's also impaired coordination. Balance, coordination, memory, judgment is one of the reasons that maybe for safety of driving, this could be an issue. This is a health con, if you want to call it, impaired driving. And we haven't seen it yet. In some states, they're looking at some of the data and saying, well, they don't take as many risks, say, as somebody that's a drunk driver that's much more, has the inhibition. I know, but there's some other factors too. Here's one. This is a big con, gateway effect. Now, I'm not going to go through and try to debate this because there's different sides of whether or not marijuana is a gateway to other or other drugs. But there could be some data to suggest yes, and some to say, well, not necessarily so. So again, on the blog, you can make that decision yourself. I'm just saying that I've always thought that it was a gateway only because I saw friends who said to me when I wasn't into this scene, we did marijuana, we're going to try to do some hash, or we're going to try to do some cocaine, or we're going to try to do some amphetamines. So I did see that now. Now, that wasn't everybody. It could have been some other factors. But the point is, it might be a concern that if a young adolescent's using marijuana, say, well, why not try speed, or why not try cocaine, or why not try heroin, So, yes, it's real. But, again, there's debate on that. So, psychological effects of marijuana. This one is a concern, and it's a con, especially if somebody has undiagnosed psychological disorders. It could be a real problem, especially if they have some schizophrenia. This could be a real problem in some patients who have, psychotic episodes. This could be an issue. Now, they're also looking at it, to be fair, from a medical standpoint, to maybe help some patients. But again, cannabinoid receptors, when you get above a certain threshold, it seems to have not the effect that you want. So they have to look at the whole thing and look at all the receptors and find out which ones are going to be beneficial with THC, which ones are not going to be a good choice when it comes to that. But overall, if somebody's undiagnosed, this could be an issue. Potency, diversity, product diversity and potency. With so many different ways to consume THC now, with some of the different edibles and some of the different things coming out, they're concerned that there might be, sometimes some overlap where people aren't realizing, hey, I didn't realize that I got it from that. So that they have to really be careful because there's such a wide range of products. So I think that's a very valid point. And I know I talked to people that had done some of the edibles, made brownies or something else, and the effect that they had was sometimes much later than they got from smoking, but also sometimes much more profound because the levels were so much higher. And of course, it's all affected by absorption, the stomach, all that. So there's so many factors. But overall, I can weigh in on this and have my own opinion, and, I probably would spark a lot of controversy if I did. But I have to say that if somebody really is thinking about, the fact that we need to legalize this, let's just do it. I mean, it's just like alcohol. No, alcohol follows zero order connects as far as elimination. Alcohol has got its own set of problems. But my question is, before we do this, before we legalize marijuana for recreational use, we really need to count the costs from a health standpoint. And I hope the powers that be in government and some of us citizens have a say in this so that we can come to a conclusion that it is going to be right for our country. And this drug is a drug. Could it be a benefit? Absolutely. But it's a two-edged sword. And I think we have to really come to grips with what's the right course of action. So I hope that information helps. I'm sure I'm going to get a lot of controversy on this, but I kind of like that sometimes. But I just want to address this from the health standpoint, because at Rx Healthy Habits, I like to talk about topics that people are talking about. And this one you're going to hear more about. I think in the election cycle coming up, in a lot of the states right now, you're going to see more of this discussion. And I think a little bit more education on your part by going to my blog and reading about at least the health aspects is going to really help you out a lot. So until next video podcast, stay healthy, stay strong, and read up on this topic, because I think it's going to make a big difference to you and some of the ones you love.